G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 12th of January 2026. Now the Russians again have attacked energy infrastructure across Ukraine. Ukrainians of course are angry, but of course these are retaliations for yesterday's strikes, and of course Ukraine again is going to retaliate and claim their retaliation. So, tit for tat. It's a never-ending cycle, which Ukraine doesn't seem to want out, only wants to complain about the situation. But trust me when I say the only solution Ukraine wants is to defeat Russia. I guess everybody now wants to be the little engine who could, and wants their status up there with all the other little countries that beat big powers. But of course, historically that may happen a few times, but it's not going to happen every time. You can't win every conflict, and Ukraine does not actually understand that, Russians are sore losers, Ukraine's a sore loser. This is the problem, isn't it? You have two like-minded people who are slugging it out, low intensity, right? These are two prize fighters at the end of their game, right, who are now just taking a few jabs at each other. But now and again, Russia hits out with a huge volley. Now this has been, once upon a time, you would only get one or two strikes a week. Now we're getting up to 3, sometimes 4. And of course, that's my theory, that we're nearing the end of the war, whether a settlement is made or not. And I have a theory. Wow, we just had a few pop-up updates. But my theory is this. Putin doesn't want a settlement until, he's reached the red line. And when he reaches it, he'll go, okay, the military operation is winding up. They'll have a big speech. They'll have a big signing ceremony. Then they'll put the ball into America's court and say, look, we can't trust the Ukrainians. Will you do, but if you want peace in Ukraine, this is the ultimatum. Now, the ultimatum is going to be made up of mostly American talking points. They just want to make it sound like it was their idea. And I think many of you have been in this workplace situation before. When you pitch an idea to the boss, he tells you what a piece of shit you are, how lazy you are, get back to work. And then a few weeks later, he's over at corporate, pitching your idea as his idea. And then next thing you know, corporate's making the announcement that good old your manager is employee of the month and had this great, wonderful idea, and he's getting this bonus, and he's now part of corporate. You got screwed, basically. And I think this is what's going to happen to Ukraine, and Zelensky's going to be told to step down. Duma's going to hold a vote on interim elections, and nobody's going to know Zelensky's fate because, let's face it, he's an intelligent asset. And not, he's a president, but he's still an intelligent asset of foreign powers. And face it, Ukrainians don't like him. He's got too many enemies. No matter how this war ends, he is a marked man. And one of these days you're going to hear about him getting a ricin capsule to the arse by some Bulgarian. And British intelligence will have disposed of him and then say, oh, it was the Russians because it was some poison that Russia used 20 years ago. That don't look at when we took samples and shipped them off to secret labs. Don't look here. Look over here, and then look over here. Oh, look, here's the card. But that's what they do, right? They misdirect you. But ultimately, you look at the battle map, and the situation is not very good for Ukraine. So please take it with a grain of salt that Ukraine is not going to get everything they want. And if they don't settle, Russia's going to get more than now, right? And every time there's an advancement. Like today, Russia's just going to update the terms and conditions of Ukraine's, I wouldn't call it surrender, right? They're not asking Ukraine to surrender. They're asking Ukraine to cede land and maintain a non-hostile status to Russia by maintaining a small army. They can't threaten them, and Ukraine says, but we can't defend ourselves. Well, you couldn't defend yourself already. That's why you have a foreign army of over 100,000. That's why you need foreign arms. That's why you need millions of dollars from other countries. No, you are already defenseless. It is the right. If there was a military victory in sight, well, so far Russia hasn't presented, but there is, the obsession with wonder weapons, and yes, Ukraine increasingly is seeing new weapons in the battlefield, and over the coming days, I might actually be able to look at some of them because apparently, I don't know why, but the British have declassified them almost as if they were not Ukrainian weapons, but British weapons. Particularly when you look at some of the weapons and go, wait a minute, this looks American to me, or, hey, didn't we use these in Desert Storm or something like that? I don't know. When I present them, I'll ask some combat vets whether or not they've actually seen these weapons before or whether or not they are new. And you can do it in the comments below. But for now, I've actually asked this before. I'm pretty sure if anybody could see path to victory for Ukraine, genuinely, not none of these sloppy Ukrainian statement slogans. I mean, a real path to victory where the cracks in the Russian armor really exist. Because right now, despite the small victories Ukraine has, these always turn out to be Russian killing fields, right? We've seen the images of Kupiansk. There's nothing there. Nothing for the Russians to occupy. There's no, right? There is no place for the Russians to dig in a front line along this road, right? Is mostly, both sides have reduced Kupiansk to rubble. And the Russians don't want to get into the tunnels because the Ukrainians will smoke them out. So there is no reason for the Russians to occupy Kupiansk. And they may not even want Kupiansk. Otherwise, they probably would have advanced past it instead of falling back to more secure lines. Now, I don't know why they maintain this bridge crossing here, but I think it's mostly a cut off the retreat south. I think that was at the lines where HIMARS moving between the north and south were vital to Russian strategy. But here we have, no movement and lots of combat. Again, with no movement. This, of course, there is no major movement, but of course there is little movements here and there. But street battles in Nova and Dobroninsky, street battles here. The Russians are pushing past Zakrin. Now they're pushing towards both the north and south of Lyman. They were headed directly for Lyman, but this field, I think it's mostly just to bring out the Ukrainians into Lyman to draw more in so they can pull men off the front here. So far, no, the strategy of trying to get the Ukrainians to rearrange their front line isn't working. But there are very many areas where it's all quiet on the Western Front. And at the same time, there's lots of air activity, including the fact that an F-16 short time ago was shot down, according to Russian media. We'll get to that, but Ukraine has denied it, of course. But I bet you in a few days you'll get a story of how the 5th or 6th F-16 has crashed, and that is all they're going to say. And of course, that's all they say, isn't it? That it crashed, or it was, for the pilot's safety, he had to eject. Yeah, well, under what circumstances? But Russia say that F-16 carrying out strikes on the front line, and I'll get to that later. But for now, Russia's made a bit of advance in Kursk. Whether or not they hold the line overnight will determine if the map updates tomorrow. But for now, there's only a bit of movement in the fields as they try to surround and annihilate. Now, I don't know why they need to, but I can imagine they probably just want to stop the Ukrainians feeding into here for now, which will cut off a lot of territory. And by cutting off a lot of territory up here, they'll have a lot of parts of the front line crumble. But whether or not you can't keep men on the front line and not fight them or move them without. But of course, I believe these are just orientation areas. Why there's men moving in and out of areas all the time, and the real combat occurs in and around cities and towns. But it's almost if, Russia's only sending in enough men to wear down the Ukrainians, not overwhelm the Ukrainians. And wait, wasn't that their stated goal? Now, in other areas, of course, despite artillery and firepower superiority, they have not advanced. Now, this is due to the fact that this is a low-intensity war. Both sides do not have the numbers for such a large front line. So you're going to see a lot of gaps, and Ukraine not able to exploit them. And Russia to not provoke Europe into a wider war. It's probably one of the red lines that Russia does not send in a force greater than Ukraine, which is estimated at 800,000, although figures put this as low as 670,000 because of the casualties. But right now, we only have a few advances here and there, and that is it. We do not have, again, major movement on the front line. But that is the state of the war now through most winters, where there's been hardly any major movement. But for a long time now, right, Al Jazeera has been the least propagandizing, and for once they've shown us a photo of Ukraine where there is snow. And they've admitted that more, despite Ukraine's announcement yesterday that they restored all power, that they rescinded that today. And then, of course, more critical infrastructure was hit today. And now they say, and of course, the stories always change in Ukraine. But there's a new drone, jet-powered Guran 5. They've hit Ukraine for the first time this month. This is a all-Russian variant of the Shihad drone. And this drone carries a 200-pound bomb at a range of nearly 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles, give or take. Now, of course, the Coalition of the Willing Summit. Someone actually had to build this set. Look at all the... This is what, the 14th, 15th summit now of the Coalition of Willing for Peace and Security. What does this Coalition of Peace and Security do? Oh, we pour arms and men and equipment into Ukraine. Why? Because we want to see more dead Russians. It's ethnic cleansing. That's what it is, right? Now, Sweden is going to spend more on air defense and give it to Ukraine. You watch. They'll give it to Ukraine. Remember Ursula von der Leyen? Now she wants Russia to sign her 20-point peace plan, which I bet is Zelensky's peace plan. But of course, this is what they do. They keep rubbing out Trump. This is what they do, right? Europe. No, we can't have a Trump peace plan. It's got to be Ursula von der Leyen. No, Macron. No, Keir Starmer. No, they're all buying and jostling and all all these meetings after meetings after meetings, and meanwhile Putin is laughing at us and making slow and steady gains. And while they may not be large gains, they are deliberately slow, methodical gains, so that when the time comes that the West makes up their mind, they can all agree Russia won't advance anymore, and Putin will pack up his toys and retreat nowhere, because he ain't going anywhere. And they're just going to have to eat humble pie, but publicly they're going to say, we secured a great victory for Ukraine. This was peace with honor. Peace with honor, I tell you. I am not a crook. I am not a dictator. Hail Zelensky. And then he'll disappear, or be killed, or try to be president one more time. And then if I was the Ukrainian opposition right now, I'd put my arm around him and say, Mr. Zelensky was a great president during the time of war, but his time is over, his time has come. Yank! Yeah, and pretty much spike his booze with ethanol and make him look like a drunken old fool. Allegedly. But anyway, allegedly he was a drunken old fool who relied heavily on two US generals, one of being Patton and the other being Eisenhower, with a great distrust of Montgomery, who was a political appointee. And yeah, the more you find out about World War II, the more the mythology in movies lied to you. But isn't that great? Wait until you see the Ukraine movies. I doubt there are going to be that many. Although there's already books out about this great Ukrainian, the skies of Kiev, the ghost of Kiev, the heroes of Snake Island, the sinking of the Great Peter, the Russian warship. I forget what its real name was, but there's a book out. It's called The Sinking of the Great Warship St. Peter. The Russian battleship was destroyed, annihilated by Ukrainian heroes in a daring raid. How commandos stormed the beachheads and sunk a Russian cruiser and many other pieces of fiction that are going to be sold as historical accounts by special forces. Just like, if you added up all the Special Forces books about Vietnam, they killed the entire Vietnamese army blindfolded in the middle of the jungle, where in reality Jesse Ventura spent 19 months in the Philippines, and only a few months in combat. There's this great mythology out there about war, and it's really there to sell war. Otherwise, the government would crack down on them as con artists. And it happens in Russia too. The propaganda films, they're all going to pour out the great patriotic war. And of course, Russian politicians themselves get painted in a corner, and every successive generation can't paint themselves out. This is why interfering in other countries is dangerous, right? The more we interfere in Russia, the more they're going to kick back. So really, the best thing to do is not interfere with Russia's affairs. But to what extent do we support Ukraine? Well, we allegedly supposed to, but there was no vote. There was no formal treaty. It was just a memorandum of something we put together and fell apart when China pulled out. This is the problem with politics, is we're often thrust and we often don't have a say, in what goes on. And it's more and more without our consent do politicians make these deals. Ukraine could have been the first democratically ended war where we held a vote. Didn't happen, did it? Ukraine didn't get to vote, did it? Because Zelensky says that it's impossible. Yeah. So Ukraine once again gets pounded when they could have been rebuilding. So in 149 areas get additional damage. But right, at this point, Russia does not state that it shot down an F-16. And this was a short time ago. So why is RT, now we look at the time difference, there's a 3-hour time difference when this story came out. So this came out at 8 o'clock Russian time. This came out a short time ago, 3 hours after this story, which was a few hours after I recorded yesterday. I went live yesterday, yeah. Now, yes, I do often go live. I look for your comments. Absolutely welcome them if I make a mistake. I do make mistakes, often because it's not because of Russian news. It's because the media deliberately withholds information. Not just Russia, America, are all doing it now, where you come back later and find a different story to the one that was there before. Now, I pointed out recently a friend covered on his channel about the American astronauts. So I sent him an updated version of the story and didn't berate him or if we get it wrong. I said, look, I think you better update your, doing the video and update the story because, the media's updated the story. I think you don't want someone coming back, a week later from now and putting bullshit all over all your comment section and you've got no follow-up video. That's the best thing to do. Get ahead of it. But yes, a Russian commander has told the media that he brought down a F-16 with an S-300 missile system. Now, he's saying it's his missile system? No. But he's the area air commander for SEVER, right? And he told, this is one of the battle groups in Ukraine. He was authorized, otherwise this story would have never been printed. So, right, the battery fired 2 missiles. This is standard. Now, normally F-16s travel in pairs. Right, normally they don't get within 100 kilometers of the battlefield. But the first 2 batteries allegedly damaged the aircraft, and as they were flying off, it took us time to prepare. So these F-16s have been on a regular flight pattern, and they identified this. And once they identified the pattern, now here's the photo of them back in August. Right, so they knew ahead of time that the F-16s would be carrying out this operation. So they had time to prepare. That's what they're telling us without telling us. And anticipated where the brains were going to be, and the Ukrainians were boasting these were indestructible, that they couldn't be shot down by Russian missiles, that they had the latest in blah, blah, blah. And you got to remember, right? Israel boasted about its Air Force being indestructible. However, they never tell you if any of their aircraft are shot down. Now, remember, however, when they purchased their Rafael, they had to agree to a disclosure. So that's why they stopped buying their Rafael, by the way, and F-16s, by the way, or F-35s. It's why they're developing the Israeli Rafael, of course, because they don't want to admit to whenever their aircraft are shot down. Now, Ukraine is trying to deny, but yes, planes do fall out of the sky like the rest. Now, there are different versions of this story. They have lost 4, but the Ukraine has confirmed the loss of 4, but not in combat. I've covered this. They've always said they weren't shot down, that they crashed, pilot error, had to eject, aircraft malfunction. But yes, it has turned out the reason why these aircraft crashed is they were damaged by Russian missiles. Now, not since the A4, all right, and Israel A4, I think, but this was a modified version. But it could turn out that these aircraft were fitted with new jamming but obviously these were anticipated, so they could have been caught in what's called the kill box. That's when you don't need guidance. You just point and shoot, and the missiles, once they terminally engage, there's no jamming that can stop them, right? There's no weapon out there that turns off the homing process of yet. There is tests with lasers to blind the missile, so because if it can't see you, it can't, and you're not where it anticipated, right? The missile doesn't fly at you; it flies to where you're anticipated. That's why they set up what's called the kill box. So you're flying straight into where the missiles are aimed at. And obviously the Ukrainians were on a bombing run or something, which is probably why they had to fly in a straight line within the range of an S-300, which probably wasn't there the day before or during the planning phase. Now, I don't know if this is a deliberate mistake or the Russians poking holes in the Ukrainian story or saying that we know you lost them in combat or bragging. That's up to you. But I think at least 2 would have been lost in combat, chasing down drones, hit by long-range missiles. But you'll never know because the truth hurts Ukraine, and Ukraine does not have the courage or the conviction, right? And I've told you this before, I believe the F-16 is the most shot down aircraft in the world because it is the most used aircraft in the world. But it is also aging out. That more and more... Now, and remember, Venezuela, don't bring up Venezuela. Venezuela was Chinese air defense. Now, the Russians have taken another town. This should not come as a shock to you. Normally, they've taken a town every day. There have been on days off or when the towns haven't been announced. But they're allegedly this year, allegedly in 2025, they took more territory than 2023 and 2024 combined. And this year, they are set to complete their takeover. So if they are advancing only 1%, sorry, the Ukrainians said 0.0%, 7%, but yeah. Let's say they advance somewhere between, let's say 0.9. Let's say the Russians overestimated and the Ukrainians underestimated. Let's say they advance 0.9. That's not far. That's not much territory. So they're not crossing this river. They might take Mykolaiv. I doubt they take Zaporozhye. Most of this bomb territory. Most of the front line doesn't move. So where are they taking? Probably taking all of this. Taking this. They'll be taking all this. Taking this little chunk here. There's not that many, right? They'll be closing the gaps here. Rounding it off. They won't be taking too much of this. They might take Konsk or might retreat from... They might cut through here. Who knows, right? They might cut off this little bit here to... Right? Cut off this little bit, open bit here. Cut back to the road. And fill this gap in here, up along this road. They might only come up to this line in Lyman, come up around here, and go down here. It's not much, but that's still more than Ukraine will accept. I mean, this is more than Ukraine will accept, but I think the red line is don't take too much more. I think they're reaching, that's why they're all talking about an end. I think the Russians are reaching the red line, and we're all in political theatre that there's this back and forth, push back, trying to get Russia to hold off, give Ukraine something, give them a bone, give them this, let them have this, let them have that, we'll give you this, we'll ease off here, we'll give you tankers back. Russia doesn't want those tankers back, they're China's. China's already paid for those tankers. Stop being naive and think that the media is telling you the truth, because they're not. Those tankers were paid, those are old tankers. The Chinese company pays for the oil before it leaves. It's held in escrow. Anything goes wrong, it's claimed on insurance. Now, the Chinese don't have insurance on these tankers. And the tracking, of course, was tankers are tracked. So anything goes wrong, they don't show up at port. They know where to look. Now, of course, allegedly some of these ships have British officers. So I wonder how the British knew they were going from Russia to India to China. Wow. So really, Russia set these tankers up to be taken, and I don't know why, right? They knew they would be taken, but they let it go anyway. And I think was it political or a signal to Washington? Or a save face, when you have to dare the Americans to do something, so you could turn around and say to the Americans, well, we didn't stop because the Americans stopped us, but we'll get them next time. You will never know until the Putin diaries come out. And they usually, I think the Russian leaders, usually about 20 years after their death, something that's happened, I think, since Brezhnev, where limited information about the leadership is made public to appease public concerns and understand the thought processes. From the Brezhnev papers, I think there might have been earlier papers as well, but Brezhnev talked about how he outwitted Kennedy, how Kennedy cried when the Russians set off the last test explosion, how it was way bigger than you misled us about the size of the explosion. And he said, "Did we? I said it was going to be big, didn't I?" And there was a political cartoon showing Kennedy get whacked on the head by the side of Brezhnev. Kennedy was embarrassed, caught out on Cuba. The Russians admitted they had a mole, and this greatly embarrassed. And it turned out the mole was in the CIA, and even then they found another mole in the FBI 20 years later. And that's how long, Russian intelligence is deeply embedded within Western intelligence. They're not casual players here. So we'll never know to what extent Ukraine is compromised or how compromised Russia is. But Russia's assuming now, at least, to feel compromised on some operations, but they won't say which. And I don't know which. It's just Russian bloggers feel that, Ukraine shouldn't be able to so deeply and easily penetrate Russian defenses. But I think some people have said Russia's too big to defend and China's slowly eating away at them. And I think, this is a good motive for ending the Ukraine war, but how to do it is still debated. But Russia has to undergo a radical change in its strategies. And until Putin is open to advice, it's never going to happen. I think there's just things the Russians won't think of right now. Because again, Russia could be richer than Saudi Arabia. And I mean seriously. I don't mean Saudi money I mean really seriously a rich country. It could be the dominant country in Europe quite easily with just a few changes. And ironically, Europe could have already had Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and most of the Russian Federation part of the European Federation had the Europeans been conciliatory and not hostile. Again, that's mistakes made that can eventually be rectified with new leadership in Europe. And because we have to consider post-Putin, and Putin should be considering post-Putin as well, and not just rebuilding Russia, but making sure it doesn't fall to migration. And right now, I think lots of Russians are glad they didn't join the EU because of how EU has fallen to the predatory migrants of the world. Something that will eventually politically haunt Russia and the rest of the world forever, because Russia on one hand wants to be part of Europe, and on the other hand they now regret ever even considering it because of how Russians are treated in Europe. But again, European fascism is not new. From the fall of Greece, the fall of Rome, the various wars, the various empires, we've all had problems in the past. So, we have no moral grounds on which to condemn Russia. So thank you all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. We should be thinking about moving forward. Now, I appreciate each and every one of you, and I ask for donation through Ko-Fi, joining my Patreon, or buying my books, buying my merch. All my links are in the link tree description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.